Hello, thanks for joining us for this third installment of CMMC Level 3, 4 lessons learned from an authorized C3PAO. Thomas and I are back to talk about Lesson 3, which is titled Coaching the Team. And again, I'm Tony Buenger, the Provisional Assessor here at Redspin, and
I'm Dr. Thomas Graham, CISO at Redspin.
Redspin is an authorized C3PAO that has passed the CMMC Level 3 assessment as a primary requirement to be authorized to conduct CMMC Level 3 assessments. We're here to talk about the importance of the organization walking its way through CMMC readiness. As an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization who has successfully passed the CMMC Level 3 assessment, we want to highlight the importance of getting your subject matter experts ready for the CMMC assessment. One thing we learned from our CMMC Level 3 assessment is to ensure that we are coaching all key stakeholders or subject matter experts to prepare for the assessments. And these SMEs are not just the IT and cybersecurity folks within your organization. There are SMEs from across the organization involved and need to understand how to tell their story and show proficiency in all their tasks with respect to their part in protecting CUI and FCI. So this is something we learned, that this is not an IT only endeavor, as some assessments you may have gone through in the past. So Thomas, you were in the middle of all this as we went through our assessments. Can you expand on what we learned here?
Sure, Tony. We learned, honestly, very quickly and very early on that we needed to ensure, as you mentioned, that it wasn't just our security team, it wasn't just our technical folks that had an understanding of the requirements, but really talking and walking all of our data owners through, what they're responsible for. For instance, when you're going into a security assessment, most folks don't think, you have to coach the marketing person. However, as we found out, marketing, at least within our organization, plays a role in several of the different practices and processes of CMMC. And another thing that we found out is that you have to have an understanding of this requirement all the way up to your president level, your CEO level, your board level. And the reason for that is because one of the requirements is that you have a strategic plan, which speaks to, your budgeting of your overall program. And that budgeting isn't just for the technical items. That budgeting also includes, the training of your folks. We always want to talk about return on investment with training. This is an actual requirement, and it's not just security training. It's, operational training. Do your folks know how to operate the tools that they're utilizing? And this is something that, even in my past experience with the DoD organizations themselves oftentimes struggle when they get to that budget line requirement, because a lot of the folks that speak to it don't necessarily know how it's incorporated into a larger budget if it's not a discrete line item.
Yes, that's very good points there, and it's something that we learned and we actually trained ourselves. We call it coaching. Our vice president of marketing was brought in early on because she was not fully aware of her role when it came to her participation within the CMMC Level 3 assessment itself, as she was responsible for our public website presence, our social media presence, and as you know, the CMMC Level 3 requirements are there to protect any potential exposure of CUI, to the public. Fortunately, she had all these procedures down from a non-CUI perspective. Obviously, we are also under Synergistic, a company that works in the healthcare sector, assisting hospitals and other healthcare facilities in protecting PHI. So protecting sensitive data is nothing new to us. It was just a step in a little bit different direction for her to ensure that, we also need to protect CUI, and she was able to adapt her processes and procedures to ensure we're actually protecting the CUI as a C3PAO for CMMC.
Absolutely. And it's not even just your marketing folks that you have to have this understanding with. When you're talking personnel security, now you're also getting into your HR folks, your hiring practices. What are your background checks that you're doing? Do they conform to any well-known standards? These are things that when you go in for a security assessment, a lot of folks don't think about. And when it's independent, you don't know really who's going to be the first up to bat, for instance, using a baseball analogy. In our case, when we went under assessment, the very first person, the very first morning, was that marketing person. And, as you mentioned, she had a very good and a very clear understanding of where her responsibilities were at and could speak to them to where the DivCAC assessors honestly didn't have very much follow-up questions, if I remember correctly. And that's because she had ownership of that process. She is the data owner.
Yes, that's correct, and she did a good job, and hopefully we can have her on in a future segment here. Also, the Chief Financial Officer, you mentioned strategic plan early on. A strategic plan cannot be implemented or written without your financial folks involved. And as we know, we've been discussing here in the previous lessons that CMMC requires the organization to prove that it's resourced a plan for implementation and maintenance of CMMC. So our CFO was involved early on to help write that strategic plan, and pretty much what that incorporated was, once again, we here at Synergistic and Redspin had a IT governance structure already in place, and all it took was, I don't want to say all it took, like it was so easy, but we were able to incorporate, the CMMC requirements into our current IT governance structure. Now, once again, it can be easier said than done. Now we had to coach each other on what does that mean. What does it mean to put CMMC into your IT governance processes and your structure, your investment strategy, your configuration control board, and all those other areas that may be in your organization? How do they all fit together to ensure that you put CMMC in place and you're able to actually keep CMMC? Once you get your certification, you can maintain that certification.
Well, it all boils down to this, Tony. I'm sure you know the analogy. Whenever, in a lot of circles for security, you talk about the security triad. Your administrative, your technical, your physical controls. Go looking at some certifications, it's availability, integrity, and confidentiality. But no matter which framework you may have used in the past, what certifications you go through in the past, there is those administrative components, and the administrative components very often speak to your budgeting, your training, and your understanding from your senior leadership, which, using the CFO as an example, what he had to be able to explain and shows, not sufficiently, but very well, is here's how we do it. And to your point, we had to go through and we had to ensure the documented portion of that was in place on, okay, we do it, here's how we do it. And when the CFO hits the lottery and goes to Bora Bora, here's the documentation for whoever slots into his spot. Here's how we do it.
Yes, and that's right. And you mentioned about walking through what is required of them, and what we did was, thanks to you, Thomas, you put together a very detailed responsibility traceability matrix. And once we got that down, we would actually schedule sessions, online sessions. Obviously, we're a virtual company, with the stakeholders. So when it came time to go through that CMMC strategic plan, we brought the key stakeholders in, obviously your CEO, your CFO, you, Thomas, as a CISO, and we went through, and piece by piece, we went through the CMMC assessment guide and all those references that it recommends to ensure that we had all the pieces in place that the CMMC level 3 requirements require of you. So we actually sat down together and went through those. We went through the incident response process, which just isn't your typical IT or your security responders. There's obviously, other people involved in our incident response processes. So we coached each other to the point to where we had a couple of sessions a day, weeks before our scheduled assessment.
No, you're absolutely correct, Tony. And I think in a lot of cases, those actually helped prepare folks, because when you're preparing for any type of assessment, or even a true audit, you sit there, you look at the documentation, you read things, you have questions asked of you to see how you're going to respond, but it's not until you really get into that assessment format. And as you mentioned, we took the CMMC assessment guide and pulled the language directly out of there, which is what we saw was asked when we went through formal assessment. And that way it wasn't a shock to any of our folks whenever the questions were asked during that week. It was, okay, I've already seen this question. Here's how here's how it goes. And they had the experience and the confidence knowing that, since we looked at it internally to a very granular level, that what the answers they were providing were going to meet the requirements.
Yes, that's good. So I think we're running out of time here. So basically, what we're trying to say here, it requires a team within your organization to prepare for your CMMC Level 3 assessment. So with that, this wraps up Lesson 3, coaching your team, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.